Despite the fact that Dong Potion had captured a large number of beasts, compared to Lu Sheng it was nothing. Using his powers, our boy created a golden net around the beasts. Lu Sheng's attention was fixed on Dong Potion. With a serene look, he asked if he was the famous Dong Potion. The body of our boy began to emit an intense golden aura, capable of making even marshals feel fear. And Dong Potion, who was much weaker than them, started sweating and his eyes filled with fear. He didn't know who in the world Lu Sheng really was or why he had such a powerful aura, questioning if he was a master. Rage consumed Dong Potion's mind. He clenched his teeth tightly and his eyes filled with fury. He began to release energy, thinking it was impossible for there to be someone among the stars stronger than him. Consumed by hatred, Dong Potion leaped, causing the seawater to splash in all directions. He started staring intently at Lu Sheng, clenched his fist tightly and prepared to attack, intending to prove that there was no one stronger than him among the stars of the army. As Dong Potion was slowly approaching, Lu Sheng began to observe him silently without doing anything. Our boy decided not to stand idly by. With a piercing expression, he reached out his hand toward Dong Potion. And just before his strike could land, our boy created an ice barrier in front of himself, blocking the attack effortlessly. Seeing this, Dong Potion's mind filled with confusion. He didn't know how this was possible. Lu Sheng's gaze fixed on him, and his eyes filled with joy. With a smile, he prepared to attack but decided not to be too harsh on him since it might anger Snowy. He deactivated the ice barrier, and just before Dong Potion could react, he gave him a strong punch in the stomach, creating small flames and causing his body to be forcefully thrown backward. The blow from our boy was so powerful that Dong Potion opened his mouth and began screaming in agony, unable to believe that Lu Sheng was so strong. Lu Sheng wasn't finished yet. He extended his hand toward him and began releasing a powerful burst of energy, which struck directly against Dong Potion's body, making it crash forcefully into the ground, creating a small explosion. The attack was so strong that Dong Potion was sent to an island. Now his body was buried in rubble, his clothes were torn, and he had lost consciousness. The fight was being broadcast everywhere. Everyone was speechless and their gazes were full of surprise. No one could believe that the Emperor of the East had been defeated with a single blow. Lu Sheng's eyes filled with surprise. He panicked upon seeing that his brother-in-law was too weak. In reality, he had given him a very soft blow. He closed his eyes and began to touch his head. Despite being somewhat upset, he decided to stop thinking about the matter since what was done was done. He decided to be kinder to him if they met in the future. At the same time, in the command room, the man with a scar on his face was open-mouthed, and his eyes were full of fear. Dong Potion was number 1 in the Central District. He couldn't believe that the difference between Lu Sheng and Dong Potion was so great. The northern marshal sitting next to him was also open-mouthed, and his gaze was full of surprise upon seeing that Dong Potion had been defeated as if he were trash. The marshal of the Central District began to observe the scream, and despite being in shock, he tried to remain calm. The combat strength that Lu Sheng had just displayed had already reached a level that even they had to admire, realizing that despite being so young, he was already worthy of being a marshal. Lu Sheng's attention was fixed on the sky, and his eyes filled with seriousness upon realizing that they had already arrived. While his body was surrounded by intense golden flames, with a gaze full of confidence, he explained that today he wanted to trample on the altar of the gods and undertake the task of challenging heaven. He needed to cultivate an invincible and sharp spirit. A giant screen appeared above the military ship, which began to show Lu Sheng live. He later decided to ask everyone for help so they could provide some support. Everyone's attention was fixed on Lu Sheng, and they all started watching him in silence, not knowing what he meant by this. Their eyes filled with surprise, and they couldn't help but be left open-mouthed. The Eastern Marshal began observing Lu Sheng, and his mind was filled with confusion. With an incredulous gaze, he started questioning what Lu Sheng meant by destroying the divine altar and defeating the heavens, without knowing what his true intentions were. At that moment, Lu Sheng gained momentum and landed on the water, creating a great golden burst. Lu Sheng's eyes were full of confidence, and with a determined smile, he revealed that he already knew they were here, asking why they were hiding if he could sense their presence. Just then, some electric clouds began to form in front of the ships, and upon seeing this, the Eastern Marshal couldn't help but be left speechless and panicked since a dense martial aura could be felt from the clouds. In the blink of an eye, the sky filled with black clouds, and consumed by curiosity, he left the room and jumped with the intention of seeing what was happening. Once he got a little closer, his eyes were filled with surprise and fear. He couldn't believe that they had come. From the clouds emerged the subordinates of the martial saint. The old man who had his hands resting on his cane remained calm, while on the other side, the blonde-haired man, the black-haired woman, and the blue-haired man who was sitting in front of them began to stare intently at the marshal. They were the 4 extreme symbols and the 28 mansions. A large number of martial artists appeared behind them, and upon seeing this, the marshal couldn't help but enter into shock. With a gaze full of fear, he informed Master Xuan that today the army was conducting military exercises, asking what the Extreme Martial Arts Academy was doing here. Xuan's body began to emit purple thunder, and his gaze fixed on the marshal, revealing that following the order of the Supreme Martial Saint, he had come to take Lu Sheng's head. Xuan's energy was capable of making even the strongest fall to their knees. But instead of being afraid, the marshal's eyes filled with determination. He began staring at him silently. The other marshals also appeared behind him, all clenched their fists tightly and prepared to fight, while the body of the Eastern marshal was surrounded by flames, with a piercing expression. He made one thing clear. They had already killed all the scum and degenerates of the Extreme Martial Academy, asking if they really believed that in the military department there was no one capable of standing up to them. Xuan opened his mouth and with a serious voice mentioned that he was wrong. He began pointing at Lu Sheng with his finger and with an angry gaze explained that if they had killed 2 scum from the Martial Academy, they would have forgiven them. But the star of the military army, Lu Sheng, had killed the wife of the martial saint along with her future descendant, an atrocious and unforgivable crime. Upon hearing this, all the marshals were left speechless and their expressions turned surprised. No one could believe that our boy had been the one who killed Lion Su. Behind them stood Lu Sheng on top of the sea. With an angry gaze, the Eastern marshal turned his head back and fixed his attention on him, realizing that this time he had caused quite a mess. With a vacant look, our boy began to stare at the ground in silence, questioning his actions. Then he closed his eyes, and a smile spread across his face. No wonder they were so furious, since it turned out that Lion Su carried in her wound the blood of the Extreme Martial Saint. If he had known before him that she was pregnant, he would have killed her without hesitation, since after all, he was not a saint and revenge was essential. He turned towards them and began to look at them intently with a cheerful gaze, and a proud smile appeared on his face, showing that he did not feel even an ounce of remorse for what he had done. The Marshal of the East panicked, started pointing at Xuan and the others with his finger, and trying to buy time, asked what evidence Xuan had to prove that Lu Sheng was the murderer. He explained that this matter was going to be discussed by the military department with Wu Sheng himself, and until the situation was clarified, no one could touch even a hair on Lu Sheng. The others began to observe in silence. The expression of the marshal changed. He could not avoid falling into confusion, and with an incredulous expression, he began to wonder what was happening. Xuan and his men rested their fists on the clouds and crouched as a form of respect, welcoming their lord. At that moment, thunder began to appear, and not long after, a giant eye appeared in the sky and started staring intently at our boy. Lu Sheng raised his head and began observing the eye in silence without losing composure. The war saint emerged from the clouds, and while his body was surrounded by a suffocating world, he started staring at everyone, demanding they kneel. Upon seeing the Saint of War, all the military soldiers who were on the ship knelt before him as a form of respect. Before the first year of martial arts, technology thrived, and at that time, there existed what were called firearms. The masters of ancient martial arts with advanced skills could break large stones with their hands and walk on walls, but even the most powerful could not withstand a small bullet. Humanity admired the power of science, and technology helped humans achieve many incredible and grand feats, such as exploring the sky and earth, and at that moment, law prevailed over strength. However, one day a powerful dust emerged from the sky, once the sky and the earth began to crack. Terrifying beasts descended into the human world. The technology the humans were so proud of had not been able to stop even the weakest of beasts. The limits of the human body had been surpassed, and the trajectory of civilization's development had deviated. Then powerful human warriors emerge, some wielding swords as weapons and others fighting only with their fists. The most powerful in martial arts, with just their own strength, could protect a city, a state, a region, or even a nation. They had replaced the place that originally belonged to the gods, making people's admiration and faith have a concrete and real target. The body of the martial saint began to emit a suffocating aura. With a lost gaze, he started descending towards the others. Once he approached the marshals, they all placed their fists on top of the clouds and bowed their heads before him as a sign of respect. The martial saint of war began observing them in silence. The eyes of the Eastern marshal were full of rage. He couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly and feel furious without knowing why the supreme martial saint had come. This was the reason why the army was willing to do everything possible to train a level 9 martial saint. If a true supreme expert was in command, if someone broke the rules and caused trouble, the 3,000 masters, generals, and marshals that made up the army would not be able to do anything against him. The marshal who was by his side remained calm, began to observe the martial saint in silence, while on the other side, the man who was next to him started staring at the Eastern marshal. His eyes filled with confusion. The extreme martial saint of war began to release a suffocating energy. He had come because they had said they wanted to discuss this matter with him, revealing that what he said was the evidence. His gaze fixed on Lu Shen. If he wanted someone to die, they had to yield. His body began to release even more energy. He started staring intently at our boy, asking if he had any objection. Lu Shen began observing him silently for several seconds, with a lost gaze. He started looking at the ground, then began thinking about what to do now.